chapter 17, verse 9. And verse 9 reads as such. It says, "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. And I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." Verse 12. "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I do not have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar, and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and to make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." And in verse 24, it says, "Then the woman said to Elijah, 'Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is true.'" All right, God's tools. God's title for the day is Lessons from a Widow. Now, this widow woman situation of believing in the Lord and what he can do for us is actually commonplace today. And trust me, I'm going to explain. So, and here we go. Now, before we get into it, I want to give some context about this situation. Now, the people of Zarephath was near Sidon. Sidon was the area, and religiously they worshiped the god Baal. And Baal, he was the god for fertility and rain. So that's what he represents. And so it was strongly influenced by Queen Jezebel, who was actually from that area in Sidon. And later kind of imposed, well, not kind of, she actually imposed that god Baal on the people of Israel. And it says it here in 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 31. 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 31 says, "And he not only considered its travail in the common sins of Jeroboam, son of Nabat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him." So with her influence from where she was from, when she married King Ahab, that was the influence she had brought. Instead of serving the God of Israel, they got the influence of serving Baal. That was in Israel. But where she was from, this was something that they did commonly, worship Baal. And so we learned last week that from Elijah's word, which actually came from the Lord, that he spoke boldly about, with courageous, but at the same time, suicidal, because he could have got killed on the spot by the king. But he was sent by God. He spoke boldly, and he listened to the Lord from that point on, which we had learned last week because of what he had said. Now, he said this perhaps at the same time in front of Jezebel. So knowing how he felt, and King Ahab, he was actually scared of his wife. So knowing that he had said that, this was the reason why he wanted to find Elijah to kill him. And this is why the Lord told him to get out of there. Amen? Amen. Now, back to Zarephath. Zarephath was the heartbeat of Baal worship, a region where the God of Israel was considered weak and powerless. Now, I want you to hold that thought there. God sent Elijah to Zarephath during a severe drought, and he was actually told by this poor woman that he was going to receive assistance from. Now, to demonstrate his power with his plan in mind is what the Lord had did. To demonstrate who he is, it was something that was set up for an appointed time in the future. Now, for our verses for today, in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 9. Verse 9 says, "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. And I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." Now, clearly, this woman was not an Israelite. So she clearly was a Gentile. But still, the Lord still got his message through this woman. Verse 8 and verse 9. "Then the word of the Lord came to him. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. And I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." Now, everyone who knows me, they know I'm a movie guy. I love going to the movies. You know, and many a times, movies are made by those who are not saved. You know, they're not believers. And oftentimes, there are words that's actually scripted in the movie that actually have some kind of revelation, because yes, the Lord is speaking to us even in that movie. Because the truth of the matter, unfortunately, when you go and have service, you probably have one or two scriptures read, and then after that, it's not but a bunch of fluff and emotion. So the Lord's got to get his word out in every way he possibly can. So he's going to speak to anyone or anything to get his word out, to put a revelation out there for us to grab. Amen? And this is no different with this woman who was not an Israelite, who was a Gentile, that was surrounded by Baal worshipers. He still got to this widow woman. Amen? Now, the Lord chose this widow woman. Now, you probably ask, why a widow? Why didn't he go to somebody else? Why did he chose this particular woman? Well, God had extended his grace and care to widows as a reflection of his favor and protection over those who are vulnerable. Widows play a significant role in the narrative in the Bible, as it serves as both of being vulnerable and figures, and also powerful examples or representatives of God, of showing God's love and God's provision. Heck, Ruth have a whole entire book because she's a widow. So this is why the widows are important. In Psalm 68, verse 5, it says, a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. If you were to read 1 Timothy chapter 5, it gives a whole breakdown on how the early church and today, how widows should be treated. And honestly, that's a teaching for another day. And when that teaching comes, trust me, a lot of people, especially leaders, is not going to like that word. Amen? That's something our evangelist Tia talk about. Amen? Now, let's get a little deeper into our lesson for today. Again, staying in 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 and 3. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Galilee said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Leave here, go eastward, and hide in the Carabim, east of the Jordan. Amen. Let's drop down to verse 9. Verse 9 also again says, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there, and I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. And in verse 12, as surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I do not have any bread. Now, we're going to stop here. Now, I said all this just to read, to show you that the Lord's word got from Galilee all the way to Zarephath to this woman. And according to BibleMap.com, when you look at the Bible map, it was about 13 miles away, a separation where this word got out. Now, you probably say 13 miles is not a lot nowadays because everybody's driving. But during that time, 13 miles was a nice long walk. But yet that word still got from one place to another. And we know that that word got to this widow woman because it says right here in the middle of verse 12, I do not have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive water in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home to make a meal for myself and my son, and that way we may eat it and die. So this widow woman, she was anticipating this drought to come. So she wanted to prolong death as long as she possibly could because she heard the word that came from over 13 miles away. Now, that was really interesting, but still in that same phrase, she still recognized Elijah as being God's man, despite being surrounded by worshipers of Baal. So she still recognized him as a man of God. This widow either had some kind of knowledge of the God of Israel or was familiar with the Lord in some capacity because she gave voice to it. And the way how you know she gave voice to it, because here in verse 12, she says, as surely as the Lord your God lives. So she admits and knowing that your God lives, and I'm familiar with your God. And she expressed that knowing and had some reference about the God of Israel.